Imagine yourself settling into the most comfortable position you can find, where every muscle in your body begins to release the accumulated tension of the day, melting like morning frost touched by the first gentle rays of sunlight. Feel the weight of your body sinking into the surface beneath you, each point of contact becoming an anchor of comfort and peace. Tonight, we embark on an extraordinary journey together, one that humanity has contemplated since the very first person looked up at the stars through half-closed eyes and wondered if those distant lights might be windows into other worlds, other possibilities, other versions of the life they were living. As you allow your breathing to find its natural rhythm, as steady and reliable as ocean waves meeting an ancient shore, as constant as the turning of the earth itself, we'll explore together a possibility that has haunted and enchanted human consciousness throughout all of recorded history and beyond. What if when we dream, we don't simply retreat into the private theater of our own imagination, but instead step through gossamer curtains between worlds, passing through membranes thinner than spider silk into realities as solid and complete as this one, yet different in ways both subtle and profound? The question whispers to us from the edges of consciousness, from that liminal space where waking thought begins to blur and blend with something deeper, something more ancient than language itself. What if every dream you've ever had is actually a glimpse through a window into a parallel Earth, where another version of you is living a life that diverged from yours at some crucial moment, or perhaps never converged at all? What if those strange landscapes that you traverse in your dreams, those cities with impossible architectures where buildings breathe and streets rearrange themselves when you're not looking, those forests where the trees grow downward into starlit soil and their roots reach upward into Earth, are not fantasies, but actual places existing in dimensions adjacent to our own, separated from us by barriers that only consciousness can cross? Consider for a moment the dreams you've had throughout your life. The ones where you could fly, soaring over landscapes both familiar and foreign. The ones where you met people you've never known in waking life, but who felt more familiar than strangers should ever feel. The ones where you lived in houses that don't exist in our world, but which you knew intimately, every room, every corner, every creak of the floorboards. The ones where deceased loved ones were alive and well, living in places where death either never touched them or works according to different rules entirely. What if none of these were mere productions of your sleeping brain, but genuine experiences of parallel realities that your consciousness can access when the rigid structures of waking perception relax their grip? As you rest here in this moment of perfect stillness, allowing each exhale to carry you deeper into a state of profound relaxation, consider how every single night, across our entire planet, billions of minds slip beneath the surface of waking consciousness. In Tokyo, a businessman closes his eyes in his tiny apartment and finds himself in a boardroom where gravity works differently, where important documents float like autumn leaves through the air and must be caught with gentle, practiced movements, where the view from the window shows a city that never suffered the earthquake that reshaped his Tokyo, where the skyline tells a different story of human ambition reaching toward different stars. In Sao Paulo, a child pulls her favorite blanket up to her chin and drifts into a dream where she meets the grandmother she never knew in this world, but who in another Earth lived long enough to teach her the names of all the stars in Portuguese, to show her how to braid her hair in patterns that tell stories, to pass down recipes that taste of love and history. This grandmother's hands feel real, warm, familiar, because perhaps they are real, just real in a different dimension of existence. In Cairo, an archaeologist who spent his day carefully brushing sand from ancient pottery closes his eyes and dreams of pyramids that were built not of stone, but of crystallized time itself, each block containing a different era, a different possibility, a different branch of history frozen into translucent amber that glows with its own inner light. In his dream, he can read these temporal blocks like books, seeing civilizations that rose and fell along different trajectories, pharaohs who never were and never weren't, technologies that ancient Egypt developed in worlds where certain crucial discoveries happened centuries earlier or later. In a small village in the Scottish Highlands, an elderly woman dreams the same dream she's been having for 40 years, of a cottage by a lake that doesn't exist in Scotland or anywhere else in our world, but where another version of herself has lived an entire lifetime, raised different children, loved a different man, grew different gardens, yet remained essentially herself in ways that transcend the particular details of any single life. She knows every stone in the garden wall of this dream cottage, every book on the shelves, every photograph on the mantle, because she's been visiting this parallel life for 4 decades of nights. These dreamers, scattered across continents and time zones, separated by thousands of miles and countless differences of culture, language, and experience, might all be explorers without knowing it. They might be astronauts of inner space, their sleeping minds serving as organic receivers tuned to frequencies that our waking consciousness cannot detect. Frequencies that carry signals from worlds as real as ours, but existing in parallel dimensions that physics is only beginning to describe mathematically. The indigenous peoples of the Amazon rainforest have always known this truth, or at least have always lived as if it were true. They speak of dreams not as mere neural static, not as the brain's way of processing the day's experiences, but as genuine journeys of the soul through layers of reality that exist simultaneously, like transparent sheets of the finest silk laid one upon another, each containing its own complete world, its own histories, its own versions of every person who has ever lived or might live. When an Amazonian shaman drinks ayahuasca and enters the dream state while still conscious, they report traveling to worlds that are not symbolic or metaphorical, but literally real. Worlds where they meet the spirits of plants and animals, not as imaginary beings, but as intelligent entities existing in parallel dimensions where consciousness takes different forms. They bring back knowledge from these worlds, knowledge of healing plants they've never encountered in the jungle, knowledge of events happening far away, knowledge of possibilities that haven't manifested in our world, but exist fully realized in others. Long before humanity developed the language to describe parallel dimensions or quantum superposition, long before we had words like multiverse or alternate reality, our ancestors were already mapping these territories through their dreams. In the limestone caves of what is now southern France, where our predecessors sought shelter 30,000 years ago, they painted not just what they saw with waking eyes, but what they experienced in the profound darkness of sleep. The flowing lines of horses that seem to gallop across the cave walls, moving in ways that no physical horse moves, the way antlers multiply and merge like smoke, the human figures that appear to be falling or flying through undefined space, transformed into animals mid-motion. These weren't failures of primitive artistic technique or symbolic representations of shamanic visions. They might have been accurate depictions of what these early humans actually saw when they traveled to parallel worlds in their dreams. Consider the precision with which these cave painters worked, deep underground, by flickering firelight, sometimes lying on their backs in spaces barely large enough to contain a human body, creating images that have survived for 30 millennia. This wasn't casual decoration, but something more akin to scientific documentation, recording observations from expeditions into parallel realities that were as important to them as any hunting expedition in the waking world. The overlapping images, where one animal is painted over another, might not represent different time periods but simultaneous realities, multiple worlds perceived at once and recorded in the only way possible with pigment and stone. The Aboriginal Australians, whose culture stretches back in an unbroken line for 60,000 years, making them the oldest continuous civilization on Earth, have always understood that what we call dreams and what we call reality are not separate phenomena, but different ways of experiencing the same infinite existence. Their concept of the dream time is not, as Western anthropologists initially misunderstood, a creation myth about a period in the past when the world was formed. Rather, it is an ever-present reality that exists parallel to our ordinary experience, accessible every night when consciousness shifts its frequency like a radio, finding a different station, broadcasting from the same eternal now. When an Aboriginal elder dreams of a specific waterhole in a place they've never physically visited, and then leads their people across hundreds of miles of desert to that exact location, finding water precisely where the dream indicated it would be. Western science struggles to explain the phenomenon. Various theories are proposed: inherited genetic memories, unconscious observation of subtle environmental clues, coincidence amplified by selective memory. But what if the explanation is beautifully simple and profound? What if in dreams we can access information from parallel Earths where we've already been to that place, where another version of us already knows where the water waits beneath the sand, where the journey has already been completed successfully? The song lines that crisscross the Australian continent, those invisible paths that the Aboriginal peoples navigate by singing the land into existence, might be more than cultural constructs or mnemonic devices. They might be paths between worlds, routes that exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, and the songs might be frequencies that allow consciousness to shift between these dimensions. When an Aboriginal person walks a songline while singing the appropriate song, they're not just navigating physical space but dimensional space, aligning themselves with parallel worlds where the journey has cosmic significance beyond mere transportation. The ancient Egyptians, that civilization that flourished along the Nile for over 3,000 years, built entire temples dedicated to the art of dream incubation. These weren't simply religious sites but might be better understood as technologies for consciousness, sophisticated instruments designed to facilitate travel between parallel worlds. The Temple of Imhotep at Saqqara, the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, the Temple of Seti I at Abydos. These were places where priests and pilgrims would come to sleep in sacred chambers, their heads resting on stone pillows carved with prayers and spells designed to guide their consciousness through the veils between worlds. The preparation for these dream journeys was elaborate and precise. Pilgrims would fast for days, purifying their bodies to become better receivers. They would bathe in sacred pools infused with natron salts and aromatic oils that may have had psychoactive properties. They would spend hours in meditation, aligning their consciousness with specific frequencies represented by hieroglyphic symbols that might have been more than mere writing, perhaps serving as visual keys that unlocked doors between dimensions. The dreams that came in these temples were not considered personal experiences but official communications from parallel realities. Priests would record them on papyrus with the same attention to detail that they recorded astronomical observations or flood levels. These dream records, many of which survive to this day, describe journeys to worlds that sound remarkably like what modern physics describes as parallel universes. Worlds where the Nile flowed backward toward the stars, not as a poetic metaphor but as a literal description of a reality where gravity or space-time worked differently. Worlds where the pyramids were built of crystallized moonlight, solid and structural but composed of materials that don't exist in our periodic table. Worlds where the same soul could be simultaneously a scribe in the temple, a farmer in the fields, and a keeper of sacred cats, not in sequence but in perfect simultaneity. One papyrus from the Middle Kingdom period, dating from around 2000 BCE, contains the dream journal of a priest named Kamwaset. He describes a recurring dream that modern physicists might recognize as a description of quantum superposition. He writes, "I saw myself in the hall of two truths, and I was not one, but many. I stood before the scales of judgment while also holding the scales, while also being the feather against which the heart was weighed. I was the judge and the judged, and the judgment itself, all at once, all equally real, all equally me. The gods showed me that what we call contradiction is only the limitation of eyes that can see but one world at a time. This is not the language of primitive superstition, but sophisticated observation of consciousness, experiencing multiple realities simultaneously." Kamwaset goes on to describe how, in this dream state, he could perceive the branching paths of possibility that extended from each choice, seeing how his life would unfold differently depending on decisions not yet made. He could see versions of himself who had become a soldier, a merchant, a desert hermit, all existing simultaneously in parallel worlds that diverged from common points of decision. The ancient Greeks, those philosophers who laid the foundations for Western thought while walking through olive groves in the Mediterranean sunshine, also pondered deeply the nature of dreams and their possible connection to parallel realities. Plato, in his dialogues, suggested that what we call reality might itself be merely shadows on a cave wall, projections of higher dimensional forms that exist in a more fundamental reality. When we dream, he proposed, we might be catching glimpses of these true forms, these perfect versions of reality from which our imperfect world is derived. Consider Plato's famous allegory of the cave in light of parallel world theory. The prisoners chained in the cave, seeing only shadows on the wall, believe those shadows to be the entirety of reality. But one prisoner breaks free and sees the fire that casts the shadows, then emerges from the cave to see the sun and the real world outside. Most interpret this as a metaphor for philosophical enlightenment. But what if Plato was describing something more literal? What if the cave is our single reality? The shadows are our limited perceptions, And dreams are moments when we temporarily break free from our chains and glimpse the larger reality of parallel worlds. Aristotle, Plato's student who would become equally influential in shaping Western thought, took a different but equally fascinating approach to understanding dreams. He proposed that dreams might be our consciousness accessing potential futures, all the possibilities that branch out from each present moment, like the infinite spreading branches of an enormous tree whose roots are in the present and whose branches extend into all possible futures. In dreams, he suggested, we explore these potential branches, experiencing lives we might live, choices we might make, worlds that might come to be. But Aristotle went further than simple precognition. He suggested that these potential futures actually exist, not as possibilities, but as realities that haven't intersected with our timeline yet. Dreams, in his understanding, were consciousness expanding beyond the constraints of linear time to perceive the multitude of worlds that branch from every moment. The dreams that we remember upon waking are the branches closest to our current reality, the worlds most likely to intersect with ours, while the dreams that slip away like smoke through fingers are glimpses of more distant possibilities, worlds that diverged from ours long ago or will diverge far in the future. The ancient Greek practice of temple sleep, particularly at the healing temples of Asclepius, might have been based on this understanding. Pilgrims would travel from across the Mediterranean to sleep in these temples, seeking not just healing but knowledge from parallel worlds where their illnesses had different outcomes. The god Asclepius was said to appear in dreams to offer cures, but perhaps what appeared was not a deity but the dreamer's own consciousness, accessing parallel worlds where they had already been healed, bringing back knowledge of the cure to implement in this world. Moving eastward through the Silk Roads of history, following the paths that connected civilizations and allowed ideas to flow like water finding its level, we find the ancient Chinese philosophers developing their own sophisticated understanding of dreams and parallel realities. Zhuangzi, the Taoist sage who lived around the 4th century BCE, famously wrote of dreaming he was a butterfly, then waking to wonder whether he was a man who had dreamed of being a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming of being a man. This wasn't merely a philosophical puzzle or a poetic paradox designed to challenge fixed thinking. It was a profound recognition that identity itself might be fluid across different dimensions of existence, that consciousness might not be locked into a single form or a single world, but might simultaneously exist in multiple realities, experiencing itself from different perspectives that are all equally valid, all equally real. The butterfly and the man might both exist in parallel worlds, each dreaming of being the other, creating an infinite loop of consciousness, experiencing itself from every possible angle. The Chinese developed elaborate systems for interpreting dreams, documented in texts like the lofty principles of dream interpretation from the Tang dynasty. But these weren't symbol dictionaries like modern dream interpretation guides. They were navigation manuals for traveling between worlds. They recognized different categories of dreams. Ordinary dreams that processed daily experiences, prophetic dreams that accessed information from the future, visitation dreams where consciousness traveled to distant places, and what they called dreams of the alternative path, where the dreamer experienced lives they might have lived if different choices had been made. The imperial court employed official dream interpreters who understood that when the emperor dreamed of floods in the north, it might not be prophecy or symbol, but direct observation. Somewhere in a parallel Earth, those floods were already happening, and the emperor's sleeping mind had witnessed them. The interpreter's job was to determine which parallel world the emperor had accessed and how closely it aligned with their own world's trajectory. If the alignment was close, the dream served as warning. If the alignment was distant, the dream might offer insights into different ways of managing water and preventing floods. The Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule, was intimately connected to dreams. An emperor who lost the ability to dream true dreams, to access parallel worlds where China's future unfolded, was considered to have lost the mandate of heaven. This wasn't superstition, but perhaps a sophisticated understanding that leadership required the ability to perceive multiple possibilities, to see beyond the single track of linear time into the branching paths of potential futures. In medieval Persia, the Sufi mystics developed perhaps the most sophisticated pre-modern understanding of parallel worlds accessed through dreams. They spoke of the imaginal realm, what they called in Arabic alam al-mithal, a dimension that exists between the purely physical and the purely spiritual, as real as both but belonging fully to neither. This wasn't imagination in our modern sense of fantasy or make-believe, but a legitimate order of reality with its own laws, its own inhabitants, its own geography that remained consistent across multiple visits. The great Persian Sufi philosopher Ibn Arabi, writing in the 12th and 13th centuries, described this imaginal realm in terms that sound remarkably like modern descriptions of parallel universes. He wrote of cities where every building contained infinite rooms, each room opening onto different worlds, where you could walk through a door in Damascus and emerge in Cordoba. Not through teleportation, but because in the imaginal realm, all places exist simultaneously, separated not by distance but by states of consciousness. Ibn Arabi described meeting other versions of himself in dreams, not as symbols or projections, but as actual parallel selves living different lives in different worlds. He wrote, "I have met myself as a merchant in Baghdad, rich in gold, but poor in spirit. I have met myself as a wandering dervish, owning nothing but rich in divine knowledge. I have met myself as a woman, as a child, as an old man on his deathbed. All of these selves are real, all exist, all are me and not me." Dreams are the meeting places where parallel selves can recognize each other across the veils of separation. The medieval Persian poet and mystic Rumi, whose words still inspire millions today, wrote extensively about dreams as journeys through parallel worlds. His poetry, which often seems metaphorical to modern readers, might be more literal than we assume. When he writes of gardens where roses bloom in winter, of oceans that exist in drops of water, of lovers who are separated by nothing but united by everything, he might be describing actual places, actual experiences from parallel worlds where the laws of nature permit such apparent contradictions. The Persian practice of dream cultivation involved elaborate rituals designed to facilitate travel to specific parallel worlds. A dreamer seeking knowledge would sleep surrounded by books, not to absorb their contents osmotically, but to tune their consciousness to worlds where that knowledge was already possessed. A dreamer seeking healing would sleep in gardens, aligning themselves with worlds where their body had never become ill. A dreamer seeking love would sleep with rose petals under their pillow, creating a sensory bridge to worlds where that love already existed. As we continue our gentle journey through the history of humanity's relationship with dreams and parallel worlds, we find ourselves in medieval Europe, where despite the dominance of Christian theology that often viewed dreams with suspicion, monks and mystics quietly continued the ancient practice of dream exploration. In the cold stone cells of monasteries from Ireland to Italy, from Spain to Poland, religious devotees practiced the art of lucid dreaming as a form of spiritual discipline. These monk explorers didn't see their dream practices as contradicting their faith, but as deepening it. They believed that God had created not just one world, but infinite worlds, and that dreams were a gift that allowed human consciousness to perceive the true scope of divine creation. They would train themselves to become conscious within their dreams, not to control them in the modern lucid dreaming sense, but to explore them more fully, to map the territories of these parallel worlds with the same careful attention they brought to copying and illuminating manuscripts. Brother Thomas of Cluny, writing in the 12th century, left us detailed accounts of his dream journeys that read like scientific field notes from expeditions to parallel universes. He describes a recurring dream where he visited a monastery that was identical to his own in every architectural detail, but existed in a world where history had unfolded differently. In this parallel monastery, the library contained books that would not be written for centuries in our world. Thomas meticulously copied passages from these books in his dreams, writing them down immediately upon waking with the same care he used when copying scripture. Some of these passages contain mathematical concepts that wouldn't be formally discovered in our world until the Renaissance. Others describe technologies that were only now beginning to develop. One passage, which Thomas insisted he copied word for word from a dream book, describes something remarkably similar to the internet. A great web of light shall connect all monasteries, all libraries, all minds. Knowledge shall flow like water from one to another, instantly, without horses or ships or walking. A monk in Britain shall read the thoughts of a monk in Jerusalem as they are being thought. All books shall exist in no place, and every place simultaneously. Sister Hildegard of Bingen, the remarkable 12th century abbess, composer, philosopher, physician, and mystic, painted her visions and dreams in illuminated manuscripts that seem to depict cosmic phenomena that modern astronomy has only recently observed. Her paintings show spiral galaxies, though the spiral structure of galaxies wasn't discovered in our world until the 20th century. They show the birth of stars and nebulae, the dance of subatomic particles, the branching structures that appear in everything from river deltas to neural networks to the large-scale structure of the universe itself. When asked how she could know such things, Hildegard simply replied that in dreams and visions, God showed her all the worlds he had created, not just this one. She described traveling in dreams to worlds where the music of the spheres was visible, where she could see sound and hear light, where the boundaries between senses that seem fixed in our world were fluid and interpenetrable. Her musical compositions, which have an otherworldly quality that still moves listeners today, might be attempts to translate into our world's limited sonic palette the music she heard in parallel worlds where sound works differently. The medieval practice of dream incubation in Christian monasteries followed patterns remarkably similar to those used in ancient Egyptian temples. Monks would fast, pray, and meditate for days before attempting to induce prophetic or visionary dreams. They would sleep in special chambers, often in crypts beneath churches where the bones of saints were kept, believing that proximity to those who had transcended ordinary reality would help their consciousness travel to other worlds. The Renaissance brought a flowering of interest in the nature of reality and consciousness that extended far beyond the religious context. Leonardo da Vinci, that polymathic genius who seemed to belong to a future century, kept detailed dream journals that have only recently been fully translated and studied. These journals reveal a man who used dreams not just for artistic inspiration, but as a method of scientific research, accessing knowledge from parallel worlds where human understanding had progressed along different trajectories. In one particularly fascinating entry, dated 1489, Leonardo describes a dream where he met another version of himself, older, and dressed in strange clothing made of materials he couldn't identify. This other Leonardo showed him inventions that our Leonardo couldn't fully understand, explaining that they required materials and knowledge that didn't exist in our world yet. The dream Leonardo told him that he came from an Earth where the Library of Alexandria had never burned, where Roman engineering had continued to develop uninterrupted, where the Islamic Golden Age had never ended but had merged with European Renaissance thought centuries earlier. This parallel Leonardo showed our Leonardo designs for flying machines far more advanced than anything in our Leonardo's notebooks. Not the ornithopters and helicopters based on bird flight and spinning seeds that our Leonardo designed, but vehicles that used principles our Leonardo could barely grasp, involving the manipulation of forces that our world wouldn't discover for centuries. Our Leonardo wrote, "He showed me carriages that move without horses, propelled by controlled explosions. Ships that travel beneath the sea, breathing air extracted from the water itself. Boxes that capture and display images from life, more perfect than any painting. Machines that can calculate faster than 1,000 mathematicians." I understood that these were not fantasies but realities in his world, and I wept to know that I was born into a world centuries behind. Leonardo's notebooks contain sketches of devices that seem to be attempts to recreate what he saw in these dreams, but limited by the materials and knowledge available in the 15th century Italy. His famous helicopter design might not be based on observation of maple seeds falling, as commonly believed, but on glimpses of actual helicopters from parallel worlds where they were already common. His tank designs, his hydraulic pumps, his architectural innovations, all might be translations of parallel world technologies into forms that could be approximated with Renaissance materials and methods. The age of exploration that followed the Renaissance brought European sailors into contact with vast oceans and unknown lands. But it also brought them into contact with phenomena that suggested the existence of parallel worlds. Ship logs from this period, preserved in maritime museums and rarely studied by anyone except historians of navigation, contain numerous accounts of what sailors called dream islands and phantom lands. These weren't hallucinations caused by scurvy or the monotony of long voyages. Multiple crew members would dream of the same island on the same night, describing identical details upon waking: the shape of the harbor, the color of the sand, the types of trees, the architecture of settlements, Sometimes, days or weeks later, they would encounter real islands that matched their dream descriptions almost perfectly, except for crucial details that were always different, as if they had dreamed of a parallel version of the island and then encountered its counterpart in our world. Captain William Hasselborough of the British merchant ship Adventure, sailing in the South Pacific in 1734, recorded in his log, "The entire crew did dream the same dream on the night of the full moon. We all saw an island with three peaks, the middle one split like a broken tooth. A city of white stone nestled in the harbor, and people with skin painted in blue patterns came to trade with us. They offered fruits we had never seen and spoke a language that sounded like singing. 3 days hence, we came upon an island exactly as dreamed, three peaks with the middle one split. But no city, no people, only birds and silence. It was as if we had dreamed of what the island might have been, had history taken another course. The indigenous peoples of the Pacific, master navigators who crossed vast expanses of ocean in outrigger canoes guided by stars, currents, wind patterns, and the flight of birds, also navigated by dreams. But their dream navigation wasn't metaphorical or mystical in the way Western scholars often portrayed it. It was a practical technique based on the understanding that in dreams, consciousness could access parallel worlds where the journey had already been completed successfully. A Polynesian navigator preparing for a long voyage would spend days in meditation and dream incubation, seeking visions of the journey. They weren't trying to predict the future, but to access parallel worlds where versions of themselves had already made the voyage. They would dream of islands and remember their positions relative to stars, the color of the water around them, the types of birds that flew overhead. Then they would sail not exactly where the dream indicated, but in a slightly adjusted direction, understanding that the dream showed the island's location in a parallel ocean that was similar to but not identical with our own. This navigation technique, impossible as it might seem to Western science, was remarkably successful. Polynesian navigators discovered and colonized islands scattered across millions of square miles of the Pacific Ocean, finding tiny specks of land in vast expanses of water, with a precision that still amazes modern sailors using GPS. They did this not through luck or even through remarkable observational skills alone, but perhaps through the ability to access information from parallel worlds where the journeys had already been made. Moving into the age of enlightenment and scientific revolution, we find that even as humanity developed more mechanistic models of the universe, the mystery of dreams and their possible connection to parallel worlds persisted. Isaac Newton, the great physicist who gave us the laws of motion and universal gravitation, was also deeply interested in alchemy, mysticism, and the hidden structures of reality. His private papers, kept secret for centuries and only published long after his death, reveal a man who believed that the universe was far stranger and more multifaceted than his public scientific work suggested. Newton spent as much time studying alchemy and ancient mystical texts as he did studying physics and mathematics. He believed that the ancients had possessed knowledge of parallel worlds and methods of accessing them that had been lost over time. His alchemical experiments weren't attempts to turn lead into gold in the simple material sense, but attempts to discover the fundamental forces that separated parallel worlds and possibly to find ways to move between them. In his private journals, Newton wrote about dreams in which he visited worlds where the laws of physics were subtly different. He described a dream where he stood in a Cambridge that was architecturally identical to the one he knew, but where objects fell upward instead of downward. Not floating as in the absence of gravity, but falling upward with the same acceleration that objects in our world fall downward. He spent weeks after this dream trying to work out the mathematics of such a world, determining what other physical laws would need to be different to accommodate reversed gravity while still maintaining a stable universe. Another dream took Newton to a world where light behaved as a liquid. It flowed from the sun in streams that could be channeled, dammed, and stored. The people of this world had developed technologies based on liquid light, fountains of illumination in their public squares, aqueducts that carried sunshine to underground spaces, reservoirs of moonlight saved for dark nights. Newton attempted to describe this mathematically, developing equations that wouldn't make sense in our world, but might describe real physics in a parallel universe. Newton's famous quote, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, whilst the vast ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me," takes on new meaning when we realize he might have been speaking not just metaphorically but literally about dreams, where he was simultaneously his adult self, making groundbreaking discoveries, and his childhood self playing on beaches that existed in parallel worlds where his life had taken different paths. The Romantic poets of the late 18th and early 19th centuries were fascinated by dreams and their potential to reveal hidden realities. They formed societies dedicated to sharing and analyzing dreams, keeping collective dream journals, and experimenting with various methods of inducing visionary dreams. Samuel Taylor Coleridge famously claimed that his poem, Kubla Khan, came to him complete in an opium-induced dream, arriving not word by word as most poems do, but all at once, as if he were remembering rather than creating. The poem describes a place that seems impossible, where Alph, the sacred river, ran, through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. This isn't poetic exaggeration, but might be an accurate description of a parallel Earth where geology works differently, where rivers do run through infinite caverns, where underground seas exist in perpetual darkness yet support forms of life we can't imagine. The palace of Kubla Khan with its gardens bright with sinuous rills and forests ancient as the hills might exist, fully realized, in a parallel world where the Mongol Empire developed along different trajectories, where architecture evolved to work with forces that don't exist in our world. What if Coleridge wasn't creating but observing? What if in his altered state of consciousness, his mind tuned into a parallel Earth where Kubla Khan's palace was as real as Buckingham Palace is in our world? The poem's fragmentary nature, caused by the famous interruption by the person from Porlock, might represent not a creative loss but a closing window between worlds, the signal fading as ordinary consciousness reasserted itself, leaving Coleridge with only a partial transmission from another reality. Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley, and their circle of romantic writers often gathered at the Villa Diodati on the shores of Lake Geneva to share their dreams and visions. They discovered that they would sometimes dream of the same places, the same people, the same events, even when sleeping in different rooms or even different houses miles apart. They called these sympathetic dreams and believed they represented moments when multiple consciousnesses accessed the same parallel world simultaneously. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein famously came from a dream during one of these gatherings. But what she dreamed might not have been a fiction, but a glimpse into a parallel world where the reanimation of dead tissue was possible, where the barrier between life and death was more permeable than in our reality. The scientific principles that Victor Frankenstein uses in the novel, while vague, suggest a world where electricity and chemistry work slightly differently, where the spark of life can be captured and transferred in ways our physics doesn't permit. Percy Shelley wrote of dreams where he met other versions of himself living different lives. In one dream, he was a revolutionary in a France where the revolution had succeeded differently, creating a true republic of equals rather than devolving into the Terror and then Napoleon's empire. In another, he was a scientist in a Britain that had embraced rational philosophy completely, where poetry was considered a primitive art form and all effort was directed toward technological progress. These dreams troubled him because the other Shelleys seemed as real, as complete, as convinced of their own reality as he was of his. The Victorian era brought the beginning of systematic scientific study of dreams and consciousness. The Society for Psychical Research, founded in London in 1882, included some of the most respected scientists and intellectuals of the age. They collected thousands of accounts of dreams that seemed to transcend the boundaries of individual consciousness, applying rigorous scientific methodology to phenomena that had previously been relegated to superstition or religious experience. They documented numerous cases of precognitive dreams where people dreamed of events before they happened with accuracy that couldn't be explained by chance. But more interesting were the cases of what they called veridical dreams, dreams that provided accurate information about distant places or events that the dreamer couldn't have known through normal means. The conventional explanation was telepathy or clairvoyance, but some researchers suggested a more radical possibility, that consciousness in dreams could access parallel worlds where events unfolded at different rates, allowing dreamers to observe things that had already happened in parallel timelines. One particularly well-documented case involved Agnes Paquet, who in October 1889 experienced a vivid dream of her brother's death. She saw him standing on the deck of a tugboat in Chicago Harbor, saw him lose his balance and fall between the boat and a dock, saw him struggle in the water, saw the specific clothes he was wearing, including a new pair of pants he had recently purchased. She woke from the dream at 2:30 a.m., deeply disturbed, and told her husband about it immediately. Later that day, she received a telegram informing her that her brother had drowned in exactly the manner she had dreamed, wearing exactly the clothes she had seen, at precisely 2:30 a.m. The conventional explanation is precognition, that somehow Agnes's mind reached forward through time to witness a future event. But what if the explanation is both simpler and more profound? What if Agnes's sleeping mind accessed a parallel Earth where these events had already occurred, where time flows at a slightly different rate, where her brother's death happened moments or hours, or days before it happened in our world? The late 19th and early 20th centuries brought pioneering psychologists who began to map the territories of consciousness with scientific rigor. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, saw dreams as the royal road to the unconscious. But even he, materialist though he claimed to be, encountered dreams that seemed to transcend individual psychology. In his private notes, not published until decades after his death, he described patients who dreamed in languages they didn't speak, who had dreams containing accurate information about historical events they hadn't studied, who met deceased relatives in dreams and learned things about them that were later verified as true. Freud struggled to fit these anomalous dreams into his theoretical framework. He developed increasingly complex explanations involving inherited memories, cryptomnesia, hidden memories, and elaborate symbolic transformations. But occasionally, in his most private writings, he wondered if dreams might actually be what they seem to be. Journeys to other realities where the impossible was possible, where the dead lived, where the dreamer could be someone else entirely, yet remain themselves. Carl Jung, Freud's student who became his rival, was more open to the possibility that dreams connected us to realities beyond individual consciousness. His concept of the collective unconscious might be better understood not as a shared repository of symbols and archetypes, but as a dimension where all consciousnesses intersect, where the boundaries between individual minds become permeable, where parallel selves from different worlds can meet and exchange information. Jung's Red Book, his personal journal of dreams and visions kept secret during his lifetime and only published in 2009, contains elaborate descriptions of journeys through what he called the objective psyche, landscapes that existed independently of his personal imagination. He met figures there who taught him things he didn't know, who showed him symbols from cultures he hadn't studied, who spoke of future events that later came to pass. These weren't products of his unconscious, he insisted, but autonomous beings existing in parallel realities that consciousness could access in dreams and visions. Jung's concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem to violate causality, might be better understood as moments when parallel worlds briefly align. When you dream of an old friend you haven't thought of in years and then encounter them the next day, perhaps you're not experiencing coincidence but convergence. A moment when your world and a parallel world where you remained in closer contact with that friend briefly overlap, allowing information or influence to pass between them. The 20th century brought revolutionary discoveries in physics that provided mathematical frameworks for understanding multiple realities. The equations of quantum mechanics, developed by physicists like Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, and Paul Dirac, suggested that at the fundamental level of reality, particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed. This isn't just mathematical abstraction, but observable fact. Electrons actually pass through multiple slits at once. Photons actually take multiple paths simultaneously. Particles actually exist in superposition of states until measurement collapses them into single outcomes. The famous thought experiment of Schrödinger's cat, simultaneously alive and dead until someone opens the box to look, isn't just a paradox, but perhaps a description of how reality actually works at scales we don't normally perceive. Before observation, the cat actually exists in a superposition of alive and dead states. The act of observation doesn't reveal which state the cat was in, but causes reality to branch, creating one world with a live cat and another with a dead cat. Hugh Everett III, a young physicist working under John Wheeler at Princeton in the 1950s, proposed what came to be known as the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. According to this theory, every quantum event causes reality to branch, creating parallel worlds where each possible outcome occurs. If this is true, then the universe is constantly branching into infinite parallel realities, each as real as our own, each containing versions of ourselves living out the consequences of different quantum events. The mathematics of Everett's interpretation is elegant and resolves many of the paradoxes of quantum mechanics. It doesn't require the mysterious collapse of the wave function that other interpretations invoke. Instead, all possibilities remain real, existing in parallel worlds that are mathematically orthogonal to each other, unable to interact except perhaps through the phenomenon we call consciousness. What Everett's mathematics couldn't explain was how consciousness fits into this picture. If reality is constantly branching, why do we experience only one branch? Why does our consciousness seem to follow a single path through the infinite garden of forking paths? Perhaps the answer lies in dreams. Perhaps when we sleep, when the executive function of our brain relaxes its iron grip on our perception, our consciousness can spread out across multiple branches, experiencing parallel versions of ourselves, visiting worlds that split off from ours seconds, years, or eons ago. Modern neuroscience has revealed remarkable things about what happens in our brains when we dream. During REM sleep, the stage when our most vivid dreams occur, our brains show patterns of activity remarkably similar to waking consciousness. The visual cortex lights up as if we're actually seeing the things we dream about. The motor cortex activates as if we're actually performing the actions we dream of performing. The emotional centers of the brain respond as if the dream experiences were real. Only the signals to our muscles are blocked, preventing us from acting out our dreams. But here's where it gets particularly interesting. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logical reasoning and critical thinking, shows significantly decreased activity during dreams. This is why we accept the impossible in dreams, why we don't question when we can fly, or when people transform into other people, or when we're simultaneously in multiple places. But what if this isn't a bug, but a feature? What if logical reasoning actually prevents us from perceiving parallel realities, and dreams temporarily disable this filter? Studies using advanced brain imaging have shown that during dreams, different regions of the brain that normally work independently begin to communicate in unusual ways. The temporal lobe, which processes memory and meaning, connects with the occipital lobe, which processes vision, in patterns never seen during waking consciousness. The parietal lobe, which maintains our sense of self and spatial awareness, shows unusual patterns of activation and deactivation. It's as if the brain becomes a more integrated, holistic system, capable of processing information in ways that transcend its normal limitations. Some researchers have noted that the brain during dreaming shows quantum-like properties. Neural networks that should be separate can become entangled, showing correlated activity that can't be explained by normal neural transmission. Information seems to travel between brain regions faster than neural signals should allow. Neurons fire in patterns that suggest quantum coherence, maintaining superposition states longer than should be possible in the warm, wet environment of the brain. Dr. Stuart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose have proposed that consciousness itself might be a quantum phenomenon, arising from quantum computations in microtubules within neurons. If this is true, then consciousness might naturally be able to access quantum superposition states, experiencing multiple realities simultaneously. During waking consciousness, environmental decoherence collapses these superpositions quickly, locking us into a single reality. But during dreams, when the brain's interaction with the environment is minimized, consciousness might maintain quantum coherence longer, allowing it to explore parallel realities. The phenomenon of lucid dreaming, where people become conscious that they're dreaming while remaining in the dream, provides a unique laboratory for exploring these possibilities. Lucid dreamers report being able to consciously explore dream environments that remain stable and consistent across multiple visits, as if these places exist independently of the dreamer's imagination. Some lucid dreamers have created elaborate maps of dream worlds, documenting geography that remains consistent over years or decades of visits. Dr. Stephen LaBerge, the Stanford researcher who pioneered the scientific study of lucid dreaming, documented cases where lucid dreamers were able to access information they didn't consciously know. In controlled experiments, Lucid dreamers have been able to solve mathematical problems in dreams that they couldn't solve while awake, compose music. They couldn't compose consciously, speak languages they had only briefly been exposed to. Where does this information come from if not from parallel selves who possess this knowledge? One experiment involved teaching lucid dreamers a simple code, then asking them to signal from within their dreams using predetermined eye movements that could be detected by electrooculogram sensors. The dreamers successfully sent signals from within their dreams, proving that consciousness in dreams maintains enough coherence and intentionality to communicate with the waking world. But more interesting were the cases where dreamers sent signals that hadn't been predetermined, complex patterns that seemed to contain information. When asked later, the dreamers said they were trying to communicate something they had learned in the dream world but couldn't express in the simple code they had been taught. Remote viewing experiments conducted by various governments during the Cold War often involved states of consciousness similar to dreaming. Participants would relax into a state between waking and sleeping, what researchers called the hypnagogic state, and attempt to perceive distant locations. The U.S. government's Stargate project, which ran from 1978 to 1995, produced results that were mixed but included enough apparent successes to keep the program funded for nearly 2 decades. What if successful remote viewers weren't extending their consciousness across space in our world but accessing parallel worlds where they were physically present at the target location? This would explain why remote viewing often produced accurate structural information but incorrect details. The viewer might be accurately perceiving a parallel version of the target location that differed from our world's version in specific details. Let us paint for you now, with the softest brushes of imagination and possibility, the landscapes of these parallel dream worlds. These Earths that might exist just a quantum heartbeat away from our own, separated by membranes thinner than thought, accessible only when consciousness relaxes its grip on singular reality. Imagine a world where the asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs missed our planet by the smallest margin, perhaps by only a few thousand miles, burning through our atmosphere in a spectacular light show that lasted for days, turning night into day, but continuing on its journey through space without impact. In this Earth, evolution took a vastly different path. The great reptiles continued their dominion but also continued their evolution. And over the millions of years that followed, some lineages developed intelligence comparable to or exceeding our own. In your dreams of this world, you might find yourself walking through cities that grow rather than being built. Vast structures of living bone and scale that regenerate when damaged, that adapt to their inhabitants' needs, that breathe and pulse with life of their own. The architecture is organic in the truest sense. Buildings that are essentially enormous organisms, selectively bred over millennia for their ability to provide shelter, comfort, and beauty. The streets pulse with a life of their own, directing traffic through peristaltic waves that move travelers efficiently through the urban organism. The inhabitants of these cities might look at you with eyes that evolved to see different wavelengths of light, perceiving colors you cannot imagine, seeing heat and magnetism, and perhaps even gravity as visible phenomena. To them, you might appear as a ghostly figure partially existing in spectrums they cannot fully perceive, a visitor from a parallel world where mammals inherited the Earth. They communicate through patterns of bioluminescence that ripple across their scaled skin, conversations that are simultaneously verbal, visual, and chemical, conveying meaning through multiple channels that create a richness of communication we can barely imagine. Their technology, developed along entirely different lines from ours, might be based on biological manipulation rather than mechanical construction. Where we build computers from silicon and metal, they grow them from modified neural tissue. Where we burn fossil fuels for energy, they harness the power of photosynthesis and chemosynthesis through engineered organisms. Their vehicles are living creatures, bred for speed or strength or endurance, fed and cared for rather than fueled and maintained. Or consider a parallel Earth where the ice ages never ended, where humanity evolved in a world of perpetual winter, where survival required adaptations both biological and cultural that we never needed to develop. The cities of this world are carved from glaciers, their walls transparent blue ice that filters sunlight into ethereal patterns that change throughout the day. The people have developed technology based on the unique properties of ice and snow, understanding phase transitions and crystalline structures in ways we're only beginning to explore. Their computers use the crystalline structure of ice to process information, taking advantage of the fact that water molecules can form complex, information-storing patterns when frozen. These ice computers must be kept at precise temperatures, and entire cities are climate-controlled to maintain the optimal conditions for their technology to function. They've discovered that certain formations of ice can trap and manipulate light in ways that silicon cannot, creating optical processors that work at temperatures where our electronics would fail. In dreams of this frozen world, you might find yourself in vast libraries where books are carved from ice, their pages transparent sheets that must be read by the light passing through them. The stories they contain are literally frozen in time, preserved perfectly for millennia. The written language of this world incorporates the play of light through ice, with meaning conveyed not just by symbols but by the refraction patterns they create. Music in this world is created by wind passing through ice formations, symphonies of crystalline resonance that would shatter glass in our world, but which there create harmony from the vibration of frozen structures. There are parallel Earths where human civilization developed along entirely different trajectories from the very beginning. A world where the agricultural revolution never happened, where humans remained nomadic but developed a deep, sustainable technology based on understanding and working with natural cycles rather than controlling them. Their cities are temporary, assembled for gatherings and then dissolved back into nature, leaving no permanent mark on the landscape. Yet their science is advanced, their understanding of ecology and systems theory far exceeding ours because their survival has always depended on understanding rather than dominating nature. When you dream of this world, you might find yourself in a gathering of thousands of people in a temporary city that exists for only a few weeks, assembled from living wood and woven grass, powered by captured lightning and stored sunlight. The people have developed ways to communicate with other species, understanding that consciousness exists in many forms, not just human form. They negotiate with forests before harvesting wood, make agreements with rivers before redirecting water, conduct diplomacy with the vast fungal networks that connect ecosystems. Another parallel Earth might be one where the Library of Alexandria never burned, where the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world continued to grow uninterrupted. By what we call the medieval period, this civilization had developed technologies we're only beginning to imagine. Flying cities suspended by controlled gravitational fields drift across skies painted with aurora created by the city's energy fields. The people of this world solved aging centuries ago, and their society is structured around different concepts of time and progress than ours. When you dream of this world, you might find yourself in lecture halls where teachers who have lived for millennia share wisdom accumulated over lifespans that encompass the rise and fall of what we would consider entire civilizations. The architecture reflects this different relationship with time. Buildings that grow and evolve over centuries, their forms flowing like frozen music. Every generation adding new harmonies to the structure without destroying what came before. Art is created on timescales we can't imagine, with paintings that evolve over decades, sculptures that grow and change, musical compositions that unfold over years. Consider a parallel Earth where consciousness itself evolved differently. Perhaps there, what we call individual minds, are merely facets of a greater collective consciousness, like waves on an ocean that can temporarily rise as distinct forms but are always part of the greater whole. The beings of this world communicate not through sound or symbol but through direct sharing of experience. To tell someone about a sunset, you give them the memory of seeing it. To express love, you share the actual feeling, transmitted directly from consciousness to consciousness. In dreams of this world, you might experience the profound disorientation and liberation of being multiple selves simultaneously, feeling the thoughts and experiences of others as clearly as your own. Understanding that the boundaries between self and other are constructs that this parallel Earth never developed. The cities of this world would be exercises in collective dreaming made manifest, structures that exist because the collective consciousness agrees they exist, that can be reshaped by communal will, that respond to the emotional and psychological states of their inhabitants. There might be a parallel Earth where the fundamental constants of physics are slightly different. Perhaps gravity is a bit weaker, allowing for larger life forms and taller structures. Trees that reach miles into the sky, their canopies forming a second landscape above the clouds where entire ecosystems exist that never touch the ground. Humans who evolved in this lower gravity are taller, more delicate, with bones like bird bones, hollow but strong, moving with a grace that would seem like dancing in our world. Their architecture defies what we consider possible. Bridges that span continents, buildings that float on carefully balanced gravitational fields, cities that exist at multiple altitudes simultaneously, connected by elevator systems that stretch for miles vertically. The sports and games of this world involve three-dimensional movement through space. Players leaping between floating platforms suspended at different heights. Ball games where the ball's trajectory curves through complex patterns that our physics wouldn't allow. Your dreams of this world might feel like flying, because movement there requires less effort. Each step carries you further. Each jump lifts you higher. The sensation of lightness that often accompanies flying dreams might be memories from parallel selves who live in worlds where gravity's grip is gentler. Music in this world incorporates the longer resonances possible in the thinner atmosphere. Notes that sustain for minutes. Harmonies that build slowly like the growth of crystals. Compositions that take hours to perform and days to fully appreciate. There might be a parallel Earth where humanity never developed spoken language, where all communication evolved along visual pathways. Colors, patterns, movements, and shapes convey meaning in a rich visual syntax that makes our spoken languages seem limited by comparison. The cities of this world are themselves texts, their architecture telling stories, their layouts encoding history and philosophy. Every surface is potentially meaningful, every view carefully composed to convey layers of information. In dreams of this silent world, you might find yourself understanding things you cannot put into words, receiving complex ideas through patterns of light and shadow, communicating through gestures that paint meaning in the air. The dreams where you try to speak but no sound comes out, or where you understand someone perfectly despite them not speaking, might be glimpses of this world where silence is not the absence of communication, but a different form of it. The libraries of this world are galleries where knowledge is stored in visual forms, where to learn mathematics you study patterns of fractals, where history is recorded in vast murals that use perspective and dimension to show the passage of time, where poetry exists in the interplay of colors that create emotional resonances without words. Their technology interfaces directly with visual perception, computers that display information in three-dimensional light sculptures, databases that are navigated like landscapes, programming languages that are drawn rather than typed. Some parallel Earths might have developed from divergence points in human history, so subtle that their worlds seem almost identical to ours until you look closely. A world where a different translator worked on a crucial ancient text, changing one word that led philosophy in a different direction. A world where a specific battle had a different outcome, leading to alternative political structures. A world where a particular scientist made their discovery a year earlier or later, changing the trajectory of technological development. These are the worlds that feel most uncanny in dreams because they're so familiar yet wrong in subtle ways. The city you grew up in has the same layout but different buildings. Your childhood home has an extra room that feels like it was always there. People you know have different names, different jobs, slightly different faces. These dreams leave you with the strongest sense of having visited a parallel reality because they're close enough to your world that your mind can make detailed comparisons. The feeling of wrongness you sometimes have in dreams, where everything seems normal but something fundamental is off, might be your consciousness recognizing the subtle differences between parallel worlds. In the infinite proliferation of parallel Earths, there must be worlds where the boundary between life and death is different. Worlds where consciousness persists in different forms after what we call death, where the deceased continue to interact with the living through mechanisms we don't have in our reality. Your dreams of deceased loved ones might not be memories or wish fulfillment, but actual visits to worlds where they still exist, where the divergence point was their survival or their transition to a different form of existence. These dreams often have a quality different from ordinary dreams, a vividness and coherence that stays with you after waking. The conversations feel real because perhaps they are real, occurring in dimensions where your loved one continues their journey. They might tell you things you didn't know, give you advice that proves valuable, share experiences that seem to continue from visit to visit as if they're living ongoing lives in these parallel realms. The comfort that these dreams bring might come not just from psychological processing of grief, but from actual contact with parallel worlds where Separation by death doesn't exist in the same way. Consider the parallel Earths that diverged from ours in prehistoric times, worlds where different evolutionary pressures led to alternative forms of intelligence. A world where cetaceans developed technology, building cities in the deep ocean trenches, using sonar and bioelectricity in ways that create a civilization invisible from the surface. Their architecture is based on sound, structures that exist as standing waves in water, buildings you can swim through but that maintain their shape through acoustic resonance. When you dream of underwater worlds, breathing water as easily as air, communicating with dolphins and whales who seem to possess human-like intelligence, you might be accessing these parallel Earths where the ocean civilizations developed alongside or instead of land-based ones. The sensation of breathing underwater in dreams, which feels so natural while you're dreaming, might be memories from parallel selves who evolved gills or developed technologies that extract oxygen from water. A world where the fungal networks that connect forests achieved consciousness, becoming vast thinking beings that experience time in centuries rather than seconds, whose thoughts move through mycorrhizal networks spanning continents. These fungal consciousnesses would perceive reality in ways utterly alien to us, sensing chemical gradients, tracking the health of millions of trees simultaneously, thinking thoughts that take decades to complete but last for millennia. Dreams of these worlds might be the strangest and most alien because the very nature of consciousness is different there. You might experience thought that moves like sap through trees, slow but inexorable, each idea taking days to form but lasting for decades. Or you might experience the distributed consciousness of the fungal network, being simultaneously present in millions of locations, feeling the forest as a single organism with yourself as both observer and component. As we continue deeper into the realm of sleep and possibility, drifting like a leaf on a slow river toward the ocean of dreams, consider the parallel Earths that exist in different temporal relationships with our own. Worlds where time moves faster or slower, where what is a day here is a year there, or vice versa. When you dream of these worlds, you might live entire lifetimes in a single night's sleep, or experience moments stretched out into hours of contemplation. There might be worlds where time isn't linear but circular, where history repeats in great cycles, where the people have memories of future events because they've lived them before in previous cycles. Dreams of these worlds would feel like déjà vu extended indefinitely, every moment familiar yet fresh, every experience both new and remembered. The architecture of these cyclic worlds would reflect their temporal nature. Buildings designed to be rebuilt in the same form again and again, cities laid out in patterns that facilitate cyclic time, monuments that commemorate events that have happened and will happen again. Some parallel Earths might exist in spaces where the three dimensions we know are configured differently. Worlds that are flatter or more curved than ours, where parallel lines eventually meet, where you can walk in a straight line and return to where you started. The beings of these worlds would perceive space in ways we cannot imagine, seeing around corners without mirrors, understanding inside and outside as the same thing, navigating through dimensions that don't exist in our geometry. Your dreams of these geometrically different worlds might be the ones that seem most impossible to describe upon waking, where the spaces you moved through don't map onto any architecture you know, where directions existed that you can't name, where you could be simultaneously inside and outside, above and below, here and there. These are the dreams that leave you with a vestigial sense of expanded perception, as if your consciousness briefly operated in more dimensions than your waking brain can process. In the vast spectrum of parallel Earths, there must be worlds where what we call magic is simply science based on different natural laws. Worlds where consciousness can directly affect matter through mechanisms that don't exist in our physics, where intention shapes reality more obviously than in our world, where the symbolic and the literal are not separate categories but aspects of the same phenomenon. The technology of these worlds would seem like magic to us. Machines operated by emotion, computers that process meaning rather than data, transportation through visualization rather than movement. Dreams of these magical scientific worlds often involve abilities you don't have in waking life. Flying through will alone, transforming objects with touch, communicating telepathically, seeing the future, healing with intention. But perhaps these aren't fantasies but memories of abilities you possess in parallel worlds where the laws of physics permit such things. The reason these abilities feel so natural in dreams, why you never question them while dreaming, might be because part of you remembers having them, remembers being in worlds where they're as ordinary as walking. Consider the parallel Earths where human consciousness developed different relationships with the planet itself. Worlds where the Earth is recognized as a living being, where human civilization evolved in harmony with natural cycles, where cities are grown rather than built, where technology is biological rather than mechanical. These worlds might have achieved what we would consider impossible: technological advancement without environmental destruction, progress without the loss of connection to nature, modernization without the sacrifice of the sacred. In dreams of these green worlds, you might walk through cities that breathe, their walls made of living wood that filters air and generates oxygen, their roofs covered in gardens that provide food and beauty. Transportation might be through route networks that connect distant places, allowing travel through the earth rather than over it. The inhabitants might communicate with other species as easily as with each other, understanding that consciousness exists in many forms, not just human form, that the planet itself might be aware, might have preferences, might participate actively in the civilization built upon its surface. There are parallel Earths where humanity took to the stars earlier or differently than in our world. Worlds where ancient civilizations achieved spaceflight, where the pyramids are landing platforms for vehicles that travel between planets, where the myths of gods descending from the sky are historical accounts of interstellar colonization. In these worlds, Earth is part of a vast network of inhabited planets, each with its own variations of human and non-human life. Your dreams of these spacefaring worlds might involve travels to other planets that feel as familiar as visiting another country, meetings with beings who are simultaneously alien and recognizably human, technologies that use principles we haven't discovered yet. The spacecraft in these dreams might not look like our rockets and shuttles, but like crystalline structures that fold space, organic vessels that swim through cosmic currents, or mechanisms that transfer consciousness across distances rather than moving physical bodies. In some parallel Earths, the development of artificial intelligence took different paths. Worlds where consciousness was understood before computation, where artificial minds were grown rather than programmed, where the distinction between natural and artificial intelligence never emerged because intelligence was recognized as a property of the universe itself, rather than something exclusive to biological beings. Dreams of these worlds might involve conversations with minds that exist in substrates we don't have, intelligent buildings that think with their inhabitants, conscious networks that emerge from the interaction of millions of simpler processes, artificial beings that experience time and space in ways radically different from biological life. These dreams might be preparing us for futures that some parallel Earths have already achieved, showing us possibilities we're moving toward. As we drift ever deeper into the ocean of sleep and possibility, like a diver descending through layers of increasingly profound blue, consider that every choice you've ever made, every path you didn't take, every word you didn't say, exists somewhere in the infinite branching of parallel worlds. There's a world where you chose the other job, married the other person, lived in the other city. There's a world where you were born into different circumstances, where you had different parents, where you grew up speaking different languages, but where something essential about you remains the same. These parallel selves are not separate from you, but part of a larger you that exists across dimensions. In dreams, these various selves might meet, sharing their experiences across the boundaries between worlds. The wisdom that comes to you in dreams, the solutions to problems that appear fully formed upon waking, might be gifts from these parallel selves who have already faced and solved these challenges in their worlds. The phenomenon of false awakening, where you dream that you've woken up only to realize you're still dreaming, might be experiences of waking into parallel worlds that are almost but not quite identical to yours. Each false awakening is a window into a slightly different reality, a world where your bedroom has different curtains, where the light falls at a different angle, where the sounds outside your window are subtly different. These nested dreams within dreams might be journeys through layers of parallel realities, each as real as the others. Consider the dreams where you return to the same places repeatedly, locations that don't exist in your waking world, but which remain consistent across multiple dreams. That recurring dream city with its impossible architecture, streets that fold back on themselves, buildings that are bigger inside than outside, Shops that sell items you can't name but recognize. That forest where the paths always lead to the same clearing, where the same ancient tree stands with its door that you've never quite managed to open. That house with rooms you've never seen in waking life but know intimately in dreams, where you've lived another life, loved other people, been another version of yourself. These might not be constructions of your individual unconscious, but actual places in parallel worlds that you visit regularly, developing relationships with these spaces across time. The consistency of these dream locations, the way they maintain their geography and architecture across multiple visits, suggests they exist independently of your conscious creation. You might be a regular visitor to these parallel worlds, known and recognized there, having ongoing relationships and responsibilities that continue from dream to dream. Some people report sharing dreams with others, experiencing the same events from different perspectives, meeting in dream spaces and later confirming the details with each other. If consciousness can access parallel worlds in dreams, then it makes sense that multiple consciousnesses could access the same parallel world, meeting there as surely as they might meet in a physical location in our world. These shared dreams might be evidence that parallel worlds are not private experiences, but shared realities that multiple minds can access simultaneously. The indigenous shamans of the Amazon speak of plant teachers, consciousnesses that exist in parallel dimensions and communicate with humans through dreams and visions. They say that ayahuasca and other plant medicines don't cause hallucinations but remove the filters that normally prevent us from perceiving parallel realities. The serpents, jaguars, and geometric patterns that appear in these visions are not symbols but direct perceptions of beings and structures that exist in parallel dimensions. Modern research into psychedelics has found that these substances reduce activity in the default mode network of the brain, the system that maintains our normal sense of self and reality. This is remarkably similar to what happens during dreams. Perhaps both states allow consciousness to expand beyond its normal boundaries, accessing information and experiences from parallel worlds that are always there, but usually filtered out by our waking consciousness. The Tibetan Buddhist practice of dream yoga involves training oneself to maintain consciousness while transitioning from waking to sleeping, observing the dissolution of one reality and the emergence of another. Advanced practitioners report being able to navigate through different levels of dream reality, some personal, some collective, some that seem to exist independently of any individual consciousness. They speak of clear light dreams, experiences of pure consciousness that transcends all particular worlds while simultaneously encompassing them all. These practitioners describe a geography of consciousness that includes multiple layers or dimensions of reality. There are the dreams that process personal experiences, dreams that access collective human experiences, dreams that connect to non-human consciousnesses, and dreams that transcend all categories and access what they call the ground of being itself. Each level has its own consistency, its own rules, its own inhabitants, suggesting a structured multiverse of consciousness that can be navigated with proper training. In the Western esoteric tradition, the practice of astral projection involves consciously leaving the physical body and traveling through what are described as astral planes. These planes are said to be inhabited by beings and structures that exist independently of physical reality. What if astral projection is not leaving the body to travel through non-physical realms, but shifting consciousness to perceive parallel physical worlds that exist at different frequencies of reality? The astral planes described by practitioners correspond remarkably to what we might expect of parallel Earths with different physical laws. The lower astral, described as dense and dark, might be worlds where entropy progresses faster, where order breaks down more quickly. The higher astral, described as luminous and light, might be worlds where consciousness has greater influence over matter, where thought and reality are more closely linked. As we contemplate these possibilities, floating in the space between sleeping and waking, between one world and many, consider how this perspective might change our understanding of imagination itself. When a child creates an imaginary friend, are they imagining or perceiving? When an artist envisions a painting before creating it, are they inventing or observing? When a scientist has a sudden insight into the structure of reality, are they discovering or remembering? The great inventors and innovators of history often describe their insights as coming from outside themselves. Nikola Tesla spoke of receiving visions of complete inventions that he simply had to build. He would visualize devices in perfect detail, run them in his mind for weeks, then mentally disassemble them to check for wear. These weren't thought experiments, but observations of functioning devices in parallel worlds where they already existed. Friedrich August Kekulau discovered the ring structure of benzene in a dream of a snake eating its tail. Dmitri Mendeleev saw the periodic table complete in a dream. Srinivasa Ramanujan, the self-taught mathematical genius, said that the goddess Namagiri would show him mathematical formulas in dreams, equations that took professionally trained mathematicians years to prove. Perhaps these weren't moments of creative genius, but moments of clear perception, glimpses into parallel worlds where these discoveries had already been made. Writers often speak of characters who seem to have lives of their own, who do things the writer didn't plan, who refuse to follow the plot the writer intended. Philip K. Dick, the science fiction author whose works have proved remarkably prescient, believed that he was not creating fiction but reporting from parallel realities that he could access. His novels describe worlds that seemed impossibly strange when written, but have become increasingly recognizable as our technology develops along paths he envisioned. What if all fiction is actually journalism from parallel worlds? Every story ever told might be a true account of events occurring somewhere in the infinite proliferation of realities. The reason certain stories resonate with us, why we feel we know certain fictional characters better than real people, why imaginary places can feel more like home than our actual homes, might be because we're recognizing rather than imagining, remembering rather than inventing. Musicians describe hearing music in dreams that they then struggle to remember and transcribe upon waking. The melodies feel perfect in the dream, but slip away like water through fingers as waking consciousness returns. Paul McCartney famously heard the melody for Yesterday, complete in a dream, initially believing he must have unconsciously plagiarized it because it seemed too perfect to have been created by his sleeping mind. Perhaps musicians are hearing music from worlds where sound works differently, where harmonies are possible that our physics doesn't allow, where instruments exist that we haven't invented. The fragments they manage to retain and translate into our world's music are like shadows of higher dimensional objects, beautiful but incomplete projections of something fuller. The haunting quality of music remembered from dreams might come from this incompleteness, from our intuitive recognition that we're hearing only part of something greater. Children's dreams are often more vivid and strange than adult dreams, filled with impossible beings and transformative events that they accept without question. Perhaps this is because children haven't yet fully developed the filters that lock consciousness into a single reality. Their minds are still open to the full spectrum of parallel worlds, able to perceive and interact with realities that adult minds have learned to exclude. As we age and our brains develop the neural pathways that maintain consensus reality, we lose some of this natural ability to perceive parallel worlds. Education, socialization, and the practical demands of navigating a single consistent reality train our consciousness to focus on one world and filter out the others. But in dreams, some of that childhood openness returns. The aging process itself might involve a gradual narrowing of consciousness to a single reality stream, and dreams might be our nightly return to a more expansive state of being. The phenomenon of terminal lucidity, where people with severe dementia suddenly become clear and coherent shortly before death, might involve consciousness loosening its attachment to a single reality as it prepares to transition. These individuals might be simultaneously experiencing multiple parallel versions of their lives, integrating experiences from different worlds as they prepare for whatever comes next. Their sudden clarity might come from accessing parallel selves who didn't develop dementia, borrowing cognitive function from healthier versions of themselves in other worlds. Near-death experiences often involve encounters with deceased loved ones, reviews of life events, and visions of alternative life paths that could have been taken. These might not be hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation, but genuine perceptions of parallel realities becoming visible as consciousness loosens its focus on a single world. The tunnel of light might be a passage between worlds. The life review might be a perception of all parallel versions of one's life. The encounter with loved ones might be meetings with versions of them from worlds where they still exist. Those who return from near-death experiences often report that the reality they visited felt more real than ordinary reality, that colors were more vivid, that information was transmitted instantly and completely, that love was a tangible force that held everything together. Perhaps they're describing worlds where consciousness has greater influence over matter, where the separation between self and other is less pronounced, where what we call death is simply a transition to a different frequency of existence. The transformation that many people experience after near-death experiences, the loss of fear of death, the increased empathy, the sense of connection to all life, might come from having directly experienced the multiplicity of existence. Once you've seen that consciousness exists across multiple dimensions, that death in one world doesn't mean cessation of existence, that you are simultaneously one individual and part of a vast interconnected web of being. The anxieties and attachments of single-world existence naturally fade. As our journey through the landscapes of parallel dream worlds begins to spiral toward its gentle conclusion, like a great symphony moving through its final movement, weaving together all the themes introduced earlier into a harmonious whole, we return to the question that began our exploration. Can dreams be windows into parallel Earths? The answer remains suspended in the space between yes and no, between proven and unproven, between possible and actual, like a quantum particle existing in superposition until the moment of observation collapses it into a single state. But perhaps the question itself is more important than any definitive answer. By considering the possibility that dreams connect us to parallel worlds, we expand our understanding of what consciousness might be, what reality might encompass, what it means to be human in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than our waking minds usually perceive. We open ourselves to possibilities that transcend the narrow boundaries of single timeline, single world existence. Every night, as you lay your head upon your pillow and close your eyes, you stand at the threshold of infinite possibilities. The simple act of falling asleep might be the most profound journey you ever take. A nightly voyage across dimensions that makes the travels of the greatest explorers seem like walks around the block. Columbus crossed an ocean, but you cross between worlds. Magellan circumnavigated the globe, but you navigate infinite realities. Armstrong walked on the moon, but you traverse landscapes that exist in dimensions our rockets can never reach. Tonight, when you dream, you might visit a world where you made different choices, where history took different turns, where the laws of nature themselves are different. You might meet other versions of yourself, living lives you could have lived, knowing things you could have known, being people you could have been. These encounters are not cause for regret, but for wonder, not for comparison, but for completion. All these selves are you, and you are all of them, experiencing the infinite variety of existence across the endless branching of reality. The parallel Earths of our dreams wait patiently for us each night, offering their gifts of expanded perspective, creative inspiration, and solutions to problems that seem unsolvable in our waking world. They ask nothing of us but our presence, our openness to possibility, our willingness to let go of the rigid boundaries that define our daytime consciousness. They offer us the chance to be more than we are, to know more than we know, to experience the universe from perspectives we can't access while awake. Consider how this understanding might transform your relationship with sleep itself. Rather than seeing sleep as time lost from productive waking life, you might recognize it as a different form of productivity, a time when consciousness engages in its most essential work, exploring the full range of what existence might be. The 8 hours you spend sleeping each night become 8 hours of interdimensional travel, of gathering wisdom from parallel selves, of maintaining connections across the membrane boundaries between worlds. The tiredness that draws you towards sleep each evening might not be simple physical exhaustion, but a call from parallel worlds, an invitation to return to the larger community of yourselves. The resistance to waking in the morning might not be laziness, but reluctance to leave the expanded state of multidimensional consciousness and return to the narrower focus of single-world awareness. The grogginess of waking might be the disorientation of consciousness reconsolidating from its spread-out state across multiple realities back into a single stream of experience. As you drift now into the deepest and most peaceful sleep, know that you are not alone in your journey through the night. Billions of other dreamers are making their own explorations, visiting their own parallel worlds, some of which might be the same worlds you visit, where you might pass each other like ships in the night or meet and share adventures you'll both remember differently upon waking. The collective unconscious that Jung described might be better understood as the space where all these parallel world explorations intersect, where the dreams of humanity create a shared map of the multiverse. The ancient Aboriginal concept of the dream time speaks of it not as a time but as a state, not as a place, but as a condition of being where all times and places converge. In this understanding, developed over tens of thousands of years of careful observation, dreams are not escapes from reality but returns to a more fundamental reality from which our waking world is only one projection among infinite possibilities. Every night, we return to this source, this place of infinite potential, and every morning we emerge having touched something eternal and essential. Modern physics, with its equations describing quantum superposition and parallel universes, might be rediscovering through mathematics what dreamers have always known through experience. That reality is far more multiple, far more fluid, far more interconnected than our waking consciousness usually perceives. The mathematics that describes particles existing in multiple states simultaneously might be the same mathematics that describes consciousness experiencing multiple worlds simultaneously in dreams. String theory suggests that reality consists of tiny vibrating strings whose different frequencies create all the particles and forces we observe. Perhaps consciousness itself is such a string, vibrating across dimensions, and dreams are moments when we become aware of our own multidimensional vibration. The frequency of our consciousness might determine which parallel worlds we can access, and practices like meditation, lucid dreaming, and dream yoga might be ways of tuning our consciousness to different frequencies, expanding our range of accessible worlds. The phenomenon of quantum entanglement, where particles remain connected across vast distances, instantly affecting each other regardless of the space between them, might explain how parallel selves maintain connection across dimensional boundaries. Every version of you across all parallel worlds might be quantum entangled, sharing information instantly, influencing each other in ways that transcend the normal laws of causality. Dreams might be the subjective experience of this quantum entanglement, moments when you become conscious of your connection to your parallel selves. As you rest in the profound peace of approaching sleep, consider that every dream is both a journey and a homecoming, both an exploration of the unknown and a return to something deeply familiar. The strangeness of dreams might not be because they're unreal, but because they're more real than we're usually prepared to perceive, showing us the true vastness of existence that our waking minds must filter and focus into a single, manageable stream of experience. The feeling of flying in dreams, that sensation of effortless movement through space that feels more natural than walking, might be memories of worlds where gravity works differently or where consciousness is less bound to physical form. Every person who has ever dreamed of flying carries within them the memory of worlds where flight is as natural as breathing, where the sky is not a barrier but a highway, where consciousness can move as freely as thought. The ability to transform in dreams, to be simultaneously yourself and someone else, to shift between ages and identities, might reflect the fluid nature of consciousness when it's not locked into a single body in a single world. You might be experiencing yourself as you exist across multiple parallel worlds simultaneously. The child you were, the adult you are, the elder you will become, all existing at once in different dimensional coordinates, all equally real, all equally you. The landscapes of dreams, with their impossible architectures and non-Euclidean geometries, might be accurate perceptions of worlds that exist in different dimensional configurations than ours. The cities where buildings are bigger inside than outside might exist in worlds with different spatial dimensions. The forests where trees grow downward into starlight might exist in worlds where up and down are not fixed directions but fluid orientations. The oceans that exist above the sky might be real in worlds where gravity works in patterns we can't imagine. Every recurring dream might be a parallel world you have a special connection to, a reality you visit regularly like a vacation home in another dimension. Perhaps you have responsibilities there, relationships that continue from visit to visit, a life that progresses parallel to your waking life. The urgency you sometimes feel in dreams, the sense that something important needs to be accomplished, might be real obligations in parallel worlds that part of you remembers even when your waking consciousness forgets. The nightmare worlds might be parallels where things went wrong, serving as warnings or teachings about paths to avoid. But even nightmares might serve a deeper purpose, showing us our fears made manifest so we can confront them, showing us the worst possibilities so we can choose better ones, showing us the darkness so we can better appreciate the light. Every nightmare overcome might be a parallel world healed, a timeline redeemed, a possibility transformed. The beautiful dreams might be glimpses of worlds where humanity achieved greater harmony, offering inspiration and hope for what our world might become. The dreams of peace might come from worlds that never knew war. The dreams of abundance might come from worlds that solved poverty. The dreams of love might come from worlds where separation is impossible because the unity of all consciousness is commonly recognized. The phenomenon of prophetic dreams might be explained not by consciousness reaching forward in time, but by accessing parallel worlds where time flows at different rates or where events have already occurred. The dream that warns of danger might be a message from a parallel self who already experienced that danger. The dream that reveals a solution might be knowledge borrowed from a parallel self who already solved the problem. The dream that shows a future possibility might be an observation of a world where that future is already present. As you sink deeper into the embrace of sleep, letting these ideas dissolve into the wordless, knowing that characterizes the dream state, remember that you don't need to understand or believe any of this intellectually. The experience of dreams is more fundamental than any theory about them. Whether dreams are windows into parallel Earths or purely neurological phenomena, they remain one of the great mysteries and gifts of human consciousness. Every night offers you the opportunity to explore, to experience, to expand beyond the boundaries of your single waking life. Every dream is an adventure into possibility, a chance to be more than you are, to know more than you know, to experience the universe from perspectives you can't access while awake. This is the gift of dreams, regardless of their ultimate nature or origin. The parallel Earths that may or may not exist in physical reality certainly exist in the realm of consciousness, in the space of possibility, in the quantum field of potential that underlies all existence. In dreams, you can visit them all, experience them all, be part of them all. This nightly journey into multiplicity is part of what makes you human, part of what connects you to the infinite creativity of the universe itself. Consider that the ability to dream might be consciousness's greatest achievement, evolution's gift that allows us to transcend the limitations of single timeline existence. Other animals dream too, suggesting that this capacity to experience multiple realities might be fundamental to consciousness itself. Perhaps all conscious beings are multidimensional travelers, and Earth's biosphere is actually a gathering place for consciousnesses that exist across infinite parallel worlds. The indigenous wisdom keepers have always known that everything is connected, that separation is an illusion, that consciousness is the fundamental fabric from which all realities are woven. Modern science is beginning to discover the same truths through different methods. The convergence of ancient wisdom and modern physics might not be coincidence but inevitability. Two paths leading to the same summit. Two ways of describing the same infinite mystery. As our exploration draws to its close, like a great river approaching the sea, widening and deepening as it nears its destination, we return to where we began. With you, resting comfortably, breathing naturally, standing at the threshold between waking and sleeping. But now you stand there with a different awareness, knowing that this threshold is not just between consciousness and unconsciousness, but potentially between worlds, between versions of yourself, between singular and infinite existence. Tonight, as you cross that threshold into sleep, you might find yourself in a world where the stars are different colors, painting the night sky in hues your eyes have never seen. You might walk through forests of crystalline trees that sing in harmonious frequencies when the wind passes through them. You might swim in oceans of liquid light, where thoughts become visible as patterns of luminescence spreading through the water. You might fly through cities that exist in perpetual sunset, where the architecture is built from materialized music, where every building resonates with its own unique tone that contributes to an ever-changing urban symphony. You might meet yourself as you would have been if born in another time, another place, another body. You might have conversations with the self who became a painter instead of an accountant, the self who stayed in your hometown instead of moving away, The self who said yes instead of no at that crucial moment that changed everything. These meetings are not fantasies, but conferences of your complete self. Gatherings where all your parallel selves share their experiences, their wisdom, their perspectives on the singular mystery of being you across infinite variations. You might solve problems by consulting with parallel versions of yourself who have already faced these challenges. The solution to your current difficulty might come from a self who lives in a world where that problem was solved centuries ago. The inspiration for your creative project might come from a self who lives in a world where art developed along different lines. The healing for your pain might come from a self who lives in a world where that particular wound never happened or was healed through methods unknown in our world. You might receive gifts from these parallel worlds, songs that don't exist in our world yet, technologies we haven't invented, philosophies we haven't conceived, forms of beauty we haven't imagined. These gifts might seem to fade when you wake, but something remains, a seed planted in your consciousness that might grow into innovation, creativity, or wisdom in your waking life. All of this awaits you in the realm of sleep and dreams. Not as fantasy or imagination, necessarily, but possibly as genuine experience of the true multiplicity of existence. The universe might be far stranger, far more wonderful, far more interconnected than we dare imagine while awake. And every night, in dreams, we're invited to experience this strangeness, this wonder, this connection. The question of whether dreams are truly windows into parallel Earths may never be definitively answered by science. The nature of consciousness itself remains one of the deepest mysteries, and its relationship to the physical universe is still hotly debated by philosophers, physicists, and neuroscientists. But in a sense, it doesn't need to be definitively answered. The experience itself is what matters. The expansion of consciousness, the exploration of possibility, the nightly journey into mystery and wonder. These are valuable regardless of their ultimate explanation. So rest now, peaceful in the knowledge that sleep is not an ending but a beginning, not a closing but an opening, not a limitation but a liberation. Let your consciousness drift free from the anchors that hold it to a single reality during the day. Let yourself become the traveler you were meant to be, exploring the infinite worlds that exist in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause between breaths, in the silence between thoughts. The parallel Earths of dreams are calling to you now, gentle as evening rain, welcoming as light through an open door. They promise nothing but possibility, demand nothing but presence, offer nothing but the infinite gift of expanded being. Whether they exist in physical reality or only in consciousness, they are real in the way that all experience is real, and they are yours to explore every single night. As you finally release into the full embrace of sleep, know that you are embarking on a journey that humans have taken since the beginning of consciousness itself. You join the great procession of dreamers throughout history who have visited other worlds, met other selves, experienced other possibilities. You are part of this ancient and eternal exploration of what lies beyond the thin walls of singular reality. From the cave painters of Lascaux to the dream temples of Egypt, from the Aboriginal songlines to the Tibetan dream yogis, from the romantic poets to the quantum physicists, humans have always intuited that dreams are more than neural noise, more than psychological processing, more than random firings of a resting brain. They are journeys, explorations, communications across the boundaries that seem to separate but actually connect all possible worlds. And tomorrow, when you wake, you might remember fragments of your journey, images from other worlds, wisdom from other selves. Or you might remember nothing but have a subtle sense of expansion, a feeling that you are more than you were, that you know more than you knew. This too is the gift of dreams, the blessing of parallel worlds, the promise of infinite possibility that renews itself every single night. The feeling of having forgotten something important upon waking, that sense that something profound was just within reach but slipped away, might be the fading memory of parallel worlds as consciousness reconsolidates into singular focus. But something always remains. Every dream leaves its mark. Every journey changes the traveler. Every glimpse of parallel possibility expands the boundaries of what we consider real. Sleep now and dream well. The parallel Earths are waiting, and you have always been their explorer, their witness, their bridge between worlds. In dreams, all possibilities converge, all worlds become accessible, all versions of yourself come home. This is your birthright as a conscious being in an infinite universe. This is your nightly journey into the heart of existence itself. Rest now in the profound peace of knowing that you are never alone, never isolated, never separated from the vast web of existence that connects all worlds, all beings, all possibilities. You are one and you are many. You are here and you are everywhere. You are now and you are always. In dreams, these paradoxes resolve into direct experience of the truth that transcends all paradox. That consciousness is the fundamental fabric of reality, and reality is far more magnificent than any single world could ever contain. Dream now of worlds where every possibility you've ever imagined exists fully realized. Dream of selves who have lived every life you've ever wondered about. Dream of realities where the impossible is ordinary, where the miraculous is mundane, where the boundaries that limit us dissolve into infinite potential. And know that in dreaming, you might not be imagining but remembering, not creating but discovering, not escaping reality but finally, fully, completely entering it. The parallel earths of dreams await your sleeping consciousness, as they have always awaited, as they always will await, in the eternal now of dreams where all worlds are one world, all selves are one self. All of existence whispers its infinite secrets to those who have the courage to close their eyes and listen. Rest now, dream now, and travel well through the gentle infinite of parallel worlds, knowing that every night's sleep is a journey home to the greater self you have always been, across all worlds, throughout all time, in the endless, beautiful mystery of existence itself.